This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. Isaiah 45, 1-3.
There are three main accounts of the childhood of the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, written by Herodotus, Xenophon, and Ctesias. Each of these stories reveals important details about the customs and traditions of the ancient Persians. By combining them, we aim to present a more complete and comprehensive picture of Cyrus's early years. It is told that Astyages, the Median king, saw in his slumber a dream of grave consequence, a vision that shook the foundations of his soul. In it, from his daughter Mandane, there flowed a mighty stream, swelling until it engulfed the royal capital and spread across the whole of Asia. Distraught and fearful, Astyages summoned the Magi, those wise men skilled in the reading of dreams, and recounted to them all that he had seen. The Magi delivered their prophecy, "O king, from your daughter shall be born a son who will seize the throne of his grandfather and rise as master over all Asia." At these words, the heart of the Median king quaked within him, and he sought a way to avert the fate decreed. Believing that if he gave Mandane in marriage to one of the great nobles of Media, the dream would surely be fulfilled, he resolved instead to wed her to Cambyses, king of Persia, a man mild in nature and lacking in power. Thus did Astyages hope to turn aside the destiny that threatened his throne. Thus it was that Mandane was given in marriage to Cambyses, and with him she departed for Persia. A year passed, and Astyages rejoiced, believing he had triumphed over the bitter fate foretold to him. Yet once more, in the stillness of night, the king of Media was seized by a troubled dream. This time, he beheld a vine springing forth from the womb of Mandane, its branches spreading wide until their shadow covered the whole of Asia. Alarmed, the king once again sought the counsel of the Magi, and once again they repeated the same prophecy as before. Shaken and fearful, the Median sovereign dispatched messengers in haste to summon his daughter, who at that time was heavy with child. Mandane was brought back from Persia to Ecbatana and confined within the royal palace. When the time of her delivery drew near, guards stood watch, and at the moment of birth, they seized the infant from his mother's arms and carried him to Astyages. The king entrusted the child to a kinsman loyal to his throne, a man named Harpagus, and commanded him, "Destroy the infant." In token of obedience, Harpagus bowed low, kissed the ground, and hastened homeward with the child. Yet grief overwhelmed him. Beating his breast and lamenting aloud, he cried within himself, "If I take the life of this child, I must bear the enmity of Mandane. If I defy the order, I must face the wrath of the king." Torn between dread and duty, Harpagus sought escape from both fates. He delivered the infant into the hands of a herdsman named Mithridates, bidding him to put the child to death. When Mithridates returned home with the noble and fair-featured child and told his tale, his wife, who that very day had borne a stillborn son, pleaded with him, "Take the dead infant and cast it to the beasts in place of Mandane's son, and let us raise this royal child as our own." The herdsman agreed. His own lifeless child he left to the wild creatures, and after 3 days he sent a messenger to Harpagus with these words, "Send someone to look upon the bones of the child, that your heart may be freed from anxious thoughts." Harpagus complied, and the remains were gathered and buried. Thus it was that Cyrus escaped the hand of death and grew up in the house of a shepherd. When Cyrus had reached the age of 10, he played among the children of the village. In their game, they chose him as their king, and he carried out the duties of royalty with striking dignity, appointing one child to one office and another to a different charge. Among them was the son of Artembares, a Median nobleman. When the boy refused to obey the commands of Cyrus, the young prince ordered that the defiant child be seized and beaten with rods. The boy, humiliated and in tears, ran to his father and told him all that had happened. Burning with anger, Artembares hastened to the court of Astyages, demanding that justice be done. Hearing his complaint, the king's brow furrowed, and he ordered that the boy who had caused this offense be brought before him. Thus, Cyrus was summoned to the royal hall. Unshaken in spirit, the boy stood before the throne, and when questioned by Astyages, he replied with the boldness of a lion. "In our play, the children made me their king, and all obeyed my commands, save only this one, who defied me with insolence. Therefore, I punished him as was fitting. If I have acted unjustly, here I stand, ready to bear my own punishment." The more Astyages gazed upon Cyrus, the more the signs of nobility and mastery shone forth from the boy's countenance. The king discerned in him a likeness to himself, and suspicion stirred within his heart. At once, he ordered Mithridates, the herdsman, to be seized and brought before the throne. When the shepherd was led into the royal hall, the king thundered at him to reveal the truth. Stricken with terror and near to death from fear, the man confessed all that had passed and laid bare the secrets long concealed. Then Astyages, moved by the charm of the child, felt affection kindle in his heart, and he rejoiced that his grandson still lived. Yet the disobedience of Harpagus he could not forgive. In his wrath, the vengeful king slew the young son of Harpagus and commanded his cooks to prepare a stew of the boy's flesh. Thereafter, he summoned Harpagus to a royal banquet and set before him the dish that had been made from the body of his own child. When Harpagus had eaten his fill, the king revealed what had been done. Though torn with agony and burning with rage, Harpagus showed no sign of defiance. He restrained his fury and answered the king, "Whatever pleases my lord the king, that is best." At the command of Astyages, an assembly of the Magi was convened to deliberate upon the fate of the young prince. The Magi sought to ease the king's fears, declaring that since his grandson had already been chosen as king in play, the vision of his dream was fulfilled, and no further danger was to be feared, for Cyrus could never again ascend to a throne. Yet they counseled that it would be wise to send the boy away from the royal presence back to Persia to dwell with his parents. Astyages was gladdened by their words, and following their advice, he dispatched Cyrus to Persia, where he was reunited with his father and mother. In that land, the boy was raised, as were the other sons of the nobility, trained and instructed in the customs of his people. Among the Persians, there was a place called the Ecbatana, where the royal palace and the buildings of state were set. Merchants and traders, whose cries and clamor disturbed the peace, were forbidden to hawk their wares in that precinct, lest they disrupt the calm and solemn order in which the children of the noble houses were educated. The great square was divided into 4 parts, one set aside for the children, another for the youths who had come of age, a third for the grown men, and the last for the elders, who by reason of years were no longer bound to bear arms. The Persian children were sent to school, where they were taught courtesy, justice, and truth. For among the Persians, truthfulness was held to be the highest of virtues. They were instructed in patience and self-restraint, that through discipline they might learn the obedience due to commanders. Moderation in food and drink was likewise instilled as a guiding principle. Once the mind was thus nurtured, the body too was trained. Until the age of 16 or 17, the children of Persia were drilled in the arts of the javelin and the bow, until they became masters of these weapons. Cyrus grew to youth, as did the other sons of Persia. Yet in learning and in noble conduct, he ever surpassed his companions. His reputation for dignity and magnanimity spread afar, until word of his deeds reached the court of Media. Astyages, troubled by these reports and fearful of what might come, summoned his grandson to Ecbatana, that he might watch him closely with his own eyes. When Cyrus arrived at the Median court, Harpagus, who still nursed the bitter wound of the king's cruelty, drew near to the young prince. In secret, he revealed all that had passed, saying, "It is to me, Cyrus, that you owe your life. When you were but an infant at the breast, the king commanded me to take your life. Yet I disobeyed, and you know well the terrible price I paid for my defiance." Then Harpagus unveiled to him the dream of Astyages and urged him boldly, "Rise up against the tyranny of the Median king, for destiny has marked you to rule." When Cyrus learned of the dream of his grandfather, he sought its meaning from a Babylonian astrologer. The Chaldean gave this reply, "This is the sign of fortune and greatness. You shall become the foremost man of Asia." Cyrus charged him to keep this secret, and the astrologer swore an oath that he would. Thus the young prince spent his youth in the court of his grandfather. Yet the corruption and decay of the Median court weighed heavily upon him, and he longed for the day when he might return to Persia and dwell once more with his father. Fortune favored him, for at that time the Medes had long been at war with the Caduceans. Their general, a man named Onophernes, weary of the strife, sought reconciliation and peace. He dispatched a messenger to Astyages, requesting that a man of trust be sent to swear an oath of alliance. Astyages judged Cyrus fit for this charge. He summoned his grandson, gave him careful instructions, and commanded him, "When your mission is accomplished, you shall return to Ecbatana within 40 days." Cyrus, uncertain and wavering in his heart, once more sought counsel from the Chaldean interpreter of dreams. The astrologer encouraged him to undertake the journey and even resolved to accompany the prince himself. When Cyrus reached the border of the Caduceans, he beheld a man tilling the soil, whose back bore the marks of the lash. Taking this as an omen, he asked the Chaldean for its meaning. The astrologer bade him inquire of the man who he was and whence he came. The laborer replied, "I am a Persian, and my name is Hyrba, At this Cyrus rejoiced greatly, for in the Persian tongue, Hyrba signified the bringer of blessed fortune. Soon after, Cyrus came before Xenophon, leader of the Ctesians, and there concluded the covenant of peace. When his task was done, he returned to Media. In Ecbatana, Harpagus continued to urge Cyrus toward defiance of Astyages. By then, he had gathered around himself an assembly of those discontent with the Median king, and he pledged to Cyrus that if he rose against his grandfather's tyranny, both he and his allies would stand beside him. Wearied by the tyranny, corruption, and cruelty of Astyages, Cyrus at last resolved to heed the urgings of Harpagus. Through his aid, he secretly dispatched a messenger to his father in Persia. In his letter, he urged Cambyses to raise an army under the pretense of aiding Astyages in his war against the Ctesians, and then to march with it toward Media. Meanwhile, with the help of Harpagus and his allies, Cyrus contrived his escape from Ecbatana. When news of the prince's flight reached the Median king, Astyages was seized with fury and cried aloud, "Ride without delay after Cyrus, bring him before me, and if he refuses my command, strike off his head." 300 swift horsemen of Media were sent forth from Ecbatana in hot pursuit. Before long, they overtook Cyrus and delivered to him the king's command. Feigning submission, the prince replied that night had fallen and urged them to rest until dawn before returning to Astyages. Then, in the Persian fashion, he slaughtered sheep, roasted the meat, and prepared for them a lavish feast. With plentiful wine, he plied them until all were drunken and overcome. Thus, under the cover of night, Cyrus slipped away and made haste toward Persia. Near the city of Hyrba, a force of 1,000 horsemen and 5,000 infantry, sent by Cambyses to aid his son, joined Cyrus. Without delay, he ordered his men to take their places in battle array. He himself held command of the right wing, while the left he entrusted to a captain named Oberas. At dawn, the Median horsemen discovered what had transpired. They hastened in pursuit, and upon reaching Hyrba, they found the Persians drawn up and ready for war. Cyrus, stationed with his cavalry on the right, gave the signal for the charge. Like a lion in his fury, he drove straight into the heart of the Median riders and struck down many of them. The Persians, who beheld their prince for the first time in the fury of battle, were astonished at his valor and the strength of his arm. Nearly 250 of the Median horsemen were slain, and the rest, broken and dismayed, turned in flight to save their lives. The horsemen who escaped the slaughter carried word of all that had transpired back to Astyages. Cyrus, meanwhile, returned with his army to Persia. Thus, with these events, open war was declared between the Medes and the Persians. In the next episode, we will cover the war between the Medes and the Persians, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be informed as soon as the new episode is uploaded.